powerlessness. Have we ever encountered that problem? You don't have to raise your hands. You don't have to say mercy. But the reality is this. In our lives, we've come to brick walls. In our lives, we've come to the end of the rope. In our lives, we've all felt what it's like to be powerless, to not have the escuo, to have meager or mediocre spiritual impact, to have great expectations turn into great frustrations. And so here, this is the situation that the Father presents. This is the frustration. This is the problem of powerlessness. And listen to how Jesus responds in verse 19. Verse 19, he says this. Jesus answered him and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me." Any parents out there? Is this something that ever comes through your mind like, oh man, how long do I have to deal with this? Any older siblings have had this experience? Maybe your little brother, your little sister, your nephew, your niece, just when are they ever going to get it? And here Jesus, it's almost as if this kind of comes out as an outburst, and you wonder, man, maybe he didn't get any sleep at the Mount of Transfiguration. He just kind of short-tempered or something. It seems kind of out of character for Jesus. It seems almost as it's an unfair unleashing upon this father, because he says this to the father, but listen to what he says. He says, "Oh, faithless what? Generation." He's not just talking about an individual. He's talking about a group of people. It's interesting, in Matthew chapter 17, when Matthew is telling the same story, he inserts a word. It says, "Oh, faithless and perverse generation." Perverse, meaning distorted, twisted, bent out of shape, headed in the wrong direction. It's a generation that is without faith, and going the exact wrong direction. Jesus says, "Oh, faithless generation." What's going on in the heart of Jesus that causes him to say this? How is it that he's so quick to make this judgment? Well, the reality is, when you consider the context of Mark chapter 9, when you consider the context of this story, actually, if you just turn to the previous chapter, in chapter 8, you kind of scan through the chapter at the beginning of chapter 8. Here, Jesus actually feeds a multitude. And it's not the first time he's done it. It's the second time, okay? He feeds 4,000 people with 7 loaves and 2 fish. And he feeds these multitudes. And immediately after, in verse 11, it says, the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. He's just fed a multitude for the second time, out of nothing. And the Pharisees are, how do we know where you're really coming from? What kind of power do you really have? And can you blame Jesus for verse 12? But he sighed deeply in his spirit. Why does this generation seek a sign? Here, coming from the spiritual leadership of God's chosen people, is an attitude of prevalent unbelief. Do you see that? Faithlessness. Just a few verses later, the disciples themselves are kind of wondering, Jesus warns them, saying, hey, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, all right? And the disciples start looking to each other, what did we do wrong? Did we forget the bread? Is he mad because we forgot the bread at the shore? The disciples just, what's going on? And Jesus says to them, do you guys have eyes and don't see? Do you have ears and don't hear? What's going on with you? Even from his closest friends, those disciples he's trying to train and entrust his work to, even from them, there's an attitude of hard-heartedness and unbelief. Further down in the chapter, in chapter 8, Jesus makes this revelation known. He actually asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? Peter says, hey, you're the Christ. We've seen it over and over. You're the man. You are the man. And Jesus says, yeah, you got that. You got that. And at that point, the very, very first time Jesus breaks the news to the disciples, I'm going to be crucified. I'm going to suffer at the hands of the religious leaders. That's the very first time that Jesus breaks the news to them. And it's as if it's a shocker to the disciples. The disciples are not quite ready for this. And Peter takes it upon himself to rebuke Jesus, to shake the finger in his face. Jesus reminds him, hey, get thee behind me, Satan, because you don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Here, there's another, Jesus runs into another instance of unbelief, of being misunderstood, of people's hearts being closed to the reality of who Jesus really is. And then in chapter 9, it's no wonder that Jesus seeks some time alone with the Father. That's why he goes up to pray. That's why he takes his 3 closest buds, Peter, James, and John, and says, hey, I need some support. Would you please go with me? And on the Mount of Transfiguration, God finds it fit to send Moses and Elijah, people who knew what it was like to work with hard hearts. Moses and Elijah to encourage this guy. In Luke chapter 9, Luke says that they were talking about his oncoming crucifixion, the cross that was just before him. These guys were encouraging him. These guys were trying to pump him up, to rub his shoulders, say, get back in there, champ. You got this. And Peter, James, and John, they fall asleep on Jesus, but when they wake up, they see the glory of heaven. And in fact, the Father himself finds the need to intervene and to remind his disciples, this is my son. Listen to him. Even God himself has to step in and remind them, you guys have faith. Would you just get it already? And so it's no wonder that when Jesus comes down the mount, with these burdens of faithlessness on his shoulders, when Jesus comes down the mount and he sees people running into the same brick walls, it's no wonder he says, "O faithless generation." I wonder if Jesus were to walk in right now. And I wonder if Jesus were to walk into our homes, into our families, into our classrooms, into our workplace, into our hearts. And when we present to him the things that we're running up against, they couldn't do it. We just couldn't. We've got our problem with powerlessness. I wonder if Jesus would say the same thing. Oh, faithless generation. You know what Jesus' first instruction is? At the end of verse 19. He says it pretty clear. Bring him to me. Amen. Bring him to me. You've got disputes. You've got questions, Pharisees. Bring the boy to me. You've experienced failure. You've experienced frustration. You can't find the answers you're looking for. Bring the boy to me. You don't feel like you're producing for God's kingdom. You don't feel like you're of any use to God's work. Bring the boy to me.